All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Good, good, because today we're looking into a case, and it's pretty messed up. Manuel Pardo Jr.,
Oh, yes.
a Florida police officer who became a serial killer. It's just, I don't know, it makes you wonder, right? How someone who's supposed to protect people ends up.
Taking lives. Yeah, it's a fascinating but disturbing trajectory. And then there's the whole Death Row Romeo thing.
Oh, yeah, we'll get to that later. But first, let's rewind. I mean, this guy was a Boy Scout
A Marine,
and
too.
graduated top of his class at the police academy, you'd think.
Model citizen, right?
Exactly. So where did things go wrong?
Well, there were signs, even early on. He was fired from the Florida Highway Patrol,
For
falsifying traffic tickets.
seriously, I mean, for a cop, that's,
A pretty big red flag.
you think. And it didn't stop there, right?
Nope. He was later hired, then fired from the Sweetwater Police Department, lying to investigators.
So a pattern of dishonesty, disregard for the rules,
Exactly. It's like he was testing the boundaries, seeing what he could get away with.
and then, boom, he dives into the drug trade.
A complete 180, from law enforcement to criminal.
It's wild, right? And then in January 1986, he takes it even further.
Murders Mario Amador and Roberto Alonso during a robbery.
His first two victims, the beginning of a spree.
And these murders, they were brutal, calculated. Police knew right away they weren't dealing with an amateur.
And it escalated from there. Over the next few months, 7 more victims.
Each one with its own chilling details.
Yeah, some are really hard to stomach. Like the murder of Michael Malott, a Haitian activist,
Pardo believed he was a police informant and executed him.
a former cop killing someone he thought was working with the police. It's just,
The irony is incredible.
yeah, it's messed up. And then there's the case of Ramon Alvaro and his girlfriend, Daisy Ricard,
Alvaro had missed some drug deals with Pardo.
and paid the price.
He shot them both. But the details about Ricard's murder, they're particularly brutal. He shot her, the gun jammed, so he bludgeoned her to death.
And in the struggle, the gun went off. He shot himself in the foot.
That gunshot wound would become crucial evidence later on.
Talk about karma, right?
He ended up in a New York City hospital trying to get treatment for that foot injury. Ballistics linked the bullet to Ricard's murder,
Gotcha. So they arrest him in the hospital.
right there. And when they search his home, they find Nazi memorabilia.
Hold on. What? Nazi stuff. Where does that fit in?
That's where things get even more complicated. It suggests Pardo's motivations might have been more complex than just, drugs and money.
Like, we're talking possible extremist beliefs.
It's possible. Could explain his soldier mentality, seeing himself as cleaning up the streets.
It's a disturbing thought. And he actually used that soldier defense in his trial, didn't he?
Yeah, against his lawyer's advice, Pardo chose to testify, claimed he was ridding Florida of drug dealers, even asked for the death penalty.
Wow, he actually said that.
I am a soldier, I accomplished my mission, and I humbly ask you to give me the glory of ending my life and not send me to spend the rest of my days in state prison.
That's chilling. So was he delusional? Or just like a master manipulator?
Hard to say, but there's another layer to this story. His partner from the Sweetwater Police Department, Rolando Garcia, was involved in some of the murders too.
Wait, another cop?
Adds a whole new dimension, raises questions about corruption within the department, maybe a wider network of criminal activity.
Unsettling to think about.
And Garcia's story takes an unexpected turn.
Oh, what happened?
He was convicted, sentenced to death, just like Pardo, but then granted a new trial on appeal, eventually pleaded guilty to lesser charges.
So he dodged the death penalty.
He did. Released from prison in 2002, a stark contrast to Pardo's fate.
Wow. 2 partners in crime, 2 very different endings.
Makes you wonder about the role of fate, chance, the complexities of the justice system.
This is already so much to unpack. We've got a seemingly good guy turned killer, extremist ideologies, corrupt cops.
It's a case that challenges our assumptions about good and evil, justice and revenge.
And then there's the whole Death Row Romeo thing, which I guess we'll save for later.
A whole other layer to this twisted story.
But for now, let's take a break.
Sounds good.
All right, so Death Row Romeo, how does that even imagine a serial killer attracting women?
It's more common than you think, actually. Notorious criminals, they often develop this mystique.
Like a dark kind of celebrity?
Exactly. The danger, the taboo. For some people, that's irresistible.
But Pardo was on death row, isolated. How did he even connect with these women?
Letters mostly. He was a prolific writer. Women would seek him out, write to him.
Drawn to his infamy.
Some, sure. Others maybe felt sympathy. Or even then the desire to fix him.
Like they saw something in him that nobody else did, or wanted to see.
Maybe. It's possible they were just looking for a connection, even if it was with, well, someone society considered a monster.
It's so strange to me. You'd think the brutality of his crimes would be, I don't know, a deal breaker.
Logically, yes. But for some, the darkness, the intensity, that's part of the attraction. It's complicated. No easy answers.
So how many women are we talking about? How many were actually involved with him?
Hard to say for sure. He corresponded with dozens, maybe hundreds over the years.
Wow, hundreds. And some of his relationships actually became serious.
Some did, even got married.
Married, on death row.
It happened, shows you the power of, I guess you could call it love, even in the most unlikely circumstances.
I guess so. But what were these women thinking? What could they possibly get out of a relationship with a man literally condemned to die?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's fascinated psychologists for years.
Any theories?
Some think it's about power dynamics, the woman having control over a man who's otherwise powerless. Others say it's rebellion, defying societal norms.
The bad boy image.
Could be. There's also the savior complex. The woman wants to rescue the criminal, redeem him.
She's the only one who truly understands him, sees the real person.
Right. And for someone like Pardo, facing execution, that kind of attention, that validation, it would have been powerful.
It's a strange mix, isn't it? Psychology, circumstance, it all plays a part. So what about the authorities? How did they react to Pardo's romantic endeavors?
They knew about it. Not much they could do, though, as long as his correspondence didn't break any prison rules.
Seems like a weird loophole. You'd think they'd want to limit his contact with the outside world.
Inmates have rights, even those on death row, and Pardo's letters weren't considered a threat.
So he was allowed to keep writing, cultivating this bizarre celebrity from behind bars.
It's a strange twist, isn't it? Even in the darkest places, the need for connection persists.
So we've got the killer, the crimes, the ideology, the corrupt cop, and now this whole Death Row Romeo thing. It's like every layer we peel back, this case gets weirder.
It's a lot to process, and while it's easy to get caught up in the sensationalism, I think it's important to remember the victims here.
Of course. 9 people lost their lives.
Their families, their loved ones, they're still living with the pain of that loss.
A good reminder that behind every true crime story, there are real people who've suffered.
Exactly. We can't lose sight of that.
So where do we go from here? We've covered so much already.
We have. But I think there's one more piece to this puzzle that we need to examine. One that ties everything together.
Oh. And what's that?
Pardo's psychology. How did a man with so much potential become a monster? We'll dive into that next.
Yeah, getting into the mind that a killer, that's always a bit unnerving, isn't it?
It can be. But it's also crucial to understanding how something like this could happen.
Right, right. So where do we even begin? I mean, we've talked about the signs, the dishonesty, the shift to the drug trade.
And yet, there's this other side to Pardo, the Death Row Romeo, the charming correspondent. It's almost like we're dealing with two different people.
It's that duality that gets me. I mean, how do you reconcile those two extremes?
It's a question that's baffled experts for years. Some believe it's a form of psychopathy, a lack of empathy, a superficial charm that masks a deep-seated capacity for violence.
So he could just turn it on and off, like a switch.
In a sense, yes. Psychopaths are often very skilled at manipulating others, at appearing normal and even likable, despite their underlying darkness.
That's terrifying to think you could be interacting with someone like that and never even know it.
It's a disturbing thought, but it's important to remember that not everyone who exhibits these traits is a killer. Psychopathy exists on a spectrum, and many individuals with psychopathic tendencies function quite well in society.
Okay, that's slightly reassuring, I guess, but in Pardo's case, it clearly went way beyond just functioning well.
Absolutely, something pushed him over the edge, and while we may never know for sure what that was, there are some theories.
Like what?
Well, some experts point to his time in the Marine Corps. The exposure to violence, the desensitization that can occur in combat situations.
Makes sense, but wouldn't that affect a lot of veterans?
It can, but it's not a guarantee. It likely depends on pre-existing vulnerabilities, personality traits, and other factors.
So in Pardo's case, maybe those experiences just amplified something that was already there.
Exactly. And then there's his firing from the highway patrol. That could have been a major trigger, a narcissistic injury, as some psychologists call it.
A blow to his ego.
Yes. Someone who's used to being in control, to being respected, suddenly faces public humiliation, a loss of status. That could be devastating.
And he was already showing signs of, well, let's call it a flexible relationship with the rules.
Right. So maybe that firing pushed him further down that path, made him feel justified in taking things into his own hands.
So the soldier mentality becomes a way to rationalize his actions, to make himself the hero of his own twisted narrative.
Precisely. He's not a criminal, he's a warrior, fighting a war against evil. And that, of course, plays perfectly into the Death Row Romeo persona.
Right. He becomes this tragic figure, misunderstood, persecuted.
And for some women, that narrative is incredibly appealing. They see him as a victim, a man who's been wronged, and they want to be the ones to offer him solace, to see the good in him that no one else can.
So it all comes full circle. The psychopathy, the experiences, the justifications, the twisted charm. It's a recipe for disaster.
It is, and it's a case that will continue to fascinate and horrify for years to come.
It certainly leaves you with a lot to think about.
It does, and it reminds us that the human mind is a complex and often unpredictable thing.
Well, on the note, I think we've reached the bottom of this particular deep dive.
I think so.
A twisted and tragic story, for sure. But hopefully one that gives us a glimpse into the dark side of human nature and reminds us to be vigilant, to question, and to never take justice for granted. Thanks for joining us on this journey, everyone. Until next time, keep diving deep.